Hallelujah. God bless family. Welcome to Sisters Addressing Trauma on Inspire Podcast 210. Hallelujah. You got me, First Lady Dr. Gloria. Hallelujah. And my sidekick, Dr. Tammy Hines. Amen. And we come this morning talking about the myth of a strong Black woman. I have the pleasure of introducing Miss Joni Wilson. I'm just meeting her and I'm going to hear about her like you guys today. So girl, come on down and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Good morning.
Good morning. As y'all already said, my name is Joni Wilson. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I work a lot with people who are dealing with childhood trauma. That's mainly what I do, and mainly marginalized populations as well. I think it's really important that we, as a people, are looking at our population and trying to help them. One thing that how I got started with all of this is before I became a counselor, because I've only been a counselor for a few years, is that I worked at Texas State University for 24 years. I retired from there 3 years ago. While I was working there for the 24 years, I worked in student diversity and inclusion, where I was working with marginalized populations, specifically Black populations. And one of the things that I saw is that a lot of them didn't want to go to counseling. You know, they would sit there and talk and tell me all their issues. But when it came to making that step and going to counseling, the first thing they would tell me is that I don't trust them or they don't look like me. And that gave me the inspiration at my age to go back to school and get my professional counseling degree. I just received that in 2019.
Go Jesus.
So, and I'm in my 60s, but I decided that this is what I needed to do to help our community, especially that we have so many people suffering from trauma, and especially childhood trauma, and it has not been resolved. So one of the things that it was so important for me to do is to incorporate history, because I have 2 degrees in history. Even my master's degree is in African history and African American history. And as I was studying, one of the things that I saw is that there was so much that went on that was not resolved during slavery, that we tend to go ahead and it is generational, that we carry it on to the next generation, to the next generation,
I agree with you on that. I agree, and I applaud you on that. That's awesome. That's that's the topic. I congratulate you.
Yeah, because what is that? You talk about the Willie Lynch.
How the things that come out of that we are still practicing today.
Absolutely.
And he said that it would last 300 years or better, but it would take a phenomenal to change and break the chains of those things that's been imposed onto us. I'm not going to hold you up. You go right ahead.
Well, I got something to wait. I got to give a props because you took a phenomenal God to choose.
You're just affirming what I have been doing, this work that I have been doing.
I have to give it to you.
And so when I got my history degrees, I didn't know what I was going to be doing with them, right? But it was when I went and got my professional counseling degree, it just all came together, and I just give that to God. God just knew what he was doing. I just knew that I wanted to know more about my history, because that's one of the things that happens to us as Black people, that we don't know our history because it's erased in public schools, or they just talk about, there was slavery and that's it. Yeah. So there was much, much more that happened. And that is one of the reasons why I went to school with 3 children as a single parent. And I started as a true freshman at Texas State University. It used to be Southwest Texas State at the time. Went through school, a double major and minor into my undergrad, then went on to University of Missouri and got my master's degree in African history and African American history.
3 kids.
So I started at Texas State. And like I said, for 24 years, I have been working with our population. And so I just thought the best way that I can help our community is to go and get this counseling degree and work for myself, and then I would be able to inspire and help others. And so this is where I came up with this myth of the strong Black woman, is because of my own life and the things that I went through, because I was carrying the load of everyone in my family. It seemed like it to me, but it was because I was also socialized to do that. And I'll talk more about that, because what happens when we think that we're so strong and we don't get help, and we don't help ourselves, like with self-care or self-compassion, we end up breaking down. We end up breaking down mentally, physically, psychologically,
Wow.
emotionally.
Wow.
And this is exactly what happened to me in my 40s. And this is just a little bit of my testimony. Is in my 40s, I had a massive stroke. And when I say massive stroke, I lost use of my whole right side. And that was because I was helping everyone else except for myself. And I'll talk more about that later. But
yeah, because I want to know what self-care, I mean, what it,
yes,
it
yes,
looks like. What steps do I need to take? What
right.
do we as women need? Yes, and I thank you. Yeah, come on, girl.
Yeah. So I think
Push them out. I'm finna come back on this buffet.
just with this conversation, it's going to be a part 2, maybe a part 3.
It might be part 4, 5, and 6 after it's all said
Come on
and
now.
done.
Because you're asking some questions that, yeah. So, but anyway, I labeled this the myth of the strong Black woman, and this one of the things I've been doing for the last 9 years is this presentation. I have added to it, but everything that I say, I back it with my research and evidence. So nobody is going to be able to question, because it is coming from pure research. Okay.
Wow.
And so this is one of the reasons why I'm still at Texas State almost every year for the last 7 years. I have been going to graduate classes who are going to be soon counselors and talking about this myth of the strong Black woman. Because when you're in school, they don't teach you what I'm about to tell you. They don't. So we have these counselors who are mostly white are going to try to help our population, and they don't know what kind of issues and situations that is different from other populations, especially Black women. They don't understand, and how that trauma has affected us generationally. So that's what I want to talk about today.
Yeah, because that's what Pastor V says about the ACEs. Am I right?
Yes.
That trauma undealt with is trauma passed on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So we
okay.
in the right
So let's go to our first slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So one of the things that I do every time that I do a presentation is that I also give respect to my ancestors. 2 years ago, I was able to go to Africa. I went to Ghana, West Africa for the first time, and walked on the sand where my ancestors walked. And that the man that's standing there, that is called the Slave River. The Slave River is a river that most people in Ghana walked through before they were put in, they call it castles, but it really was, to me, the dungeon before they are, shipped over. And so there are so many of our ancestors that walked through this river. This was the last time they would touch their land before they were put in the dungeons for at least 5 to 6 months before they were shipped off around the African diaspora. So I say this because people were walking 400 to 500 miles before they reached this river in chains. Wow. We're talking about children. We're talking about men and women, pregnant women as sometimes it would be pregnant women. They walked through this river before they got there 400 to 500 miles. And so when I talk to people about our ancestry, we have a lot of resilience. And sometimes in therapy, a lot of times people don't feel like they have resilience. If we as a people can walk that far and still survive, there's something about us that we should be proud of.
Can I interject right there? You,
Mhm.
when you said that they walked those many miles before they even got to the river, that's the original immigration.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do coming from South America, coming to our country, the things that they have to endure before they even get to where they were supposed to be.
Absolutely.
And as I'm
Absolutely.
looking at the river, and you said that's the last thing or last place they touch of their own, I'm about to cry
Yeah.
because, you know, that's just that's their home and it's beautiful and that's all they knew. So to be taken from there to walk the death walk and then to be placed in castles and things like that and the treatment of it, that was the mind change, just
This,
not to be
yes.
able to go back home.
Right.
Oh my God. Mm.
Absolutely. And what is so sad that the people who were unfit to go any further, they would drown them in this river.
Yes.
So how many people were
How
drowned?
many people, especially elderly people,
Yes.
have went through that, and as it says in Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun.
Mhm.
And this shows that we was going through this. And I guess I just step off for a minute. We was forced to do this walk.
Right.
We didn't have a choice.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and that's
Wow.
where the resilience come in, that because
Yes.
we had no choice at that moment.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I want to ask the question, not to get off of it, but is that like just saying the people that crossing this border thing with the how the Hispanics are leaving their familiar countries and familiar grounds, but on a different aspect because they're not really forced to, like
We was
Yes.
like we were
There-
forced to.
there's a
Yeah, we were forced to.
Right.
Yeah.
They didn't have a choice, and we
Right.
were forced. And the way history dictates is we was, as the new history says, we was unpaid interns.
Yeah.
You may perceive.
We the forerunners. We laid the ground for
Right.
these things.
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to say.
But interns are not beaten, right?
But that's what they're saying now. This
Yeah.
was,
Yeah. That's
well, in a sense, it was a learning. We learned not to go that way.
Okay.
But
yeah.
Yeah, Miss Joni.
Yeah. So I like to start with this, and then on the other side is the Atlantic Ocean. That was the first time that I was able to see the Atlantic Ocean from the side of my ancestors, and to walk that sea, just walk into that, and just to understand that there's so many people that didn't make it that are buried in the sea.
You know what that reminds me of? Because this is my favorite movie, coming into learning about Black history, is that in Woman King.
Mhm.
And when they went through and let them released all of them, they started going and jumping in them boats. And it was that same river,
ocean.
ocean, where they was putting them in and pushing them out. Y'all go back home,
Mhm.
in that movie. And that just recaptured me, just
Absolutely.
yeah.
So I do always start with respect of our ancestors, and because we
Most
would not be where we are if it wasn't for their resiliency and for their perseverance, for going even when it just was horrible for us. And I like to say this: in our veins, in our DNA is resiliency. It is resiliency, and that we should not ever forget that. Okay, so the next slide, please. So today, wherever we finish, this is where we finish. But I just want to say this is some of the things that are covered in this presentation. I always start with the historical background, because how are we to talk about trauma unless we know where the trauma originated? And so that's where the history comes in. And then I talk about the cultural construct of the strong Black woman, and then the problem with the strong Black woman, the whole image of it, and then the attitudes and belief of Black women in mental health, I do a lot of research on Black women and where we are. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then barriers in terms of Black women going to counseling, and then ways we can help. I doubt if we get through this whole
I
presentation,
was
but
going
we're going to
to say,
get where we
this
get,
is
right?
not going to be a one-time conversation, because we
Right.
can go point by point and say we'll be back on next
Yeah.
week.
Yes, yes.
Well, hey, it's on your availability, girl. I'm telling
Okay.
you.
Because I'm
All right.
looking at this and I'm going, how is she going to fit all of this in? Much as you just piqued my interest. Lord
I
Jesus.
know it. I'm
And
looking at
here, I'm going, oh, I can't say nothing. Okay.
No, I want you to say something.
No,
Okay.
let's go.
All right.
Okay, next presentation. Next slide, please. So I first, like I said, I want to talk about the historical and intergenerational trauma and how to define that. And so the effects of trauma are not always resolved in one generation. And we know that it has not been resolved for Black folks because a lot of times people don't even want to acknowledge slavery even started, here, with us. But anyway, when trauma is ignored and there's no support to dealing with the trauma, it is passed on from one generation to the next. And a lot of times when we start talking about defining what historical intergenerational trauma is, it could be a target group of people. Like we're talking about Black folks right now, and specifically Black women. But a lot of times family members haven't really directly experienced the trauma. Like we haven't, we're not in slavery, but we still feel the effects of slavery. We still, from generation to generation because of that. And some common groups that also experience historical trauma is American Indians or First Nation people. Black people, I labeled it Black people because I am talking about Black people across the diaspora, not just in the United States, and immigrants, and then also families experience intergenerational poverty. And this whole thing was coined and defined by a Dr. Braveheart, and she is a Native American that first was wondering about her own people and why they tend to have a lot of poverty, but also a lot of trauma. In the Native American population, some of them are, they drink a lot, and there's a lot of things that are going on, and it's because their land was taken away when and when they were forced to put on reservations. Yes, and so they have historical trauma because it has not been resolved. They just pushed them aside and put them on reservations, and so which originally it was their land. So this is go ahead.
I'm sorry, girl. It's tripping me out.
It's just blowing her away right now.
Because we never got this in Black History Month. You understand what I'm coming from? And then they just limited, and pick and choose, like you say, they picked apart what they wanted out there as far as, because they know, the information wise. And thank God for, how we can go deeper in Google and Alexa and all them other ones that can take us deeper, since they got rid of the encyclopedias and put in what they wanted to in there. But the thing that I just wanted to touch on was like, we got our freedom took and they got their land took. Is that basically how is that what that was?
We got our whole history taken away from us, because the Native Americans can look back and fall back on their tradition, their history, because they told it amongst themselves. Even though the things that they experienced along the way of getting taken and all of that, they were still in position to fight. They took our fight away, or at least, they took it away. And they hid our history, they buried it, and they can still look towards their ancestors, like you said, and the tribesmen, and they continue to press the history and traditions on with them.
Well, I would say that is true, but also along with that, the young children who were on these reservations were forced to go to different schools where they were told they had to be Americanized because they were savages, right? They had
Right.
to be Americanized, and they could not even speak their languages.
They couldn't speak it. They couldn't visit their parents. That means all of that
Yes,
was
all of
the
that.
same
So
thing
that
they did to us.
is
They stripped their children of the same thing. They
right.
stripped them.
Wow.
Absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely.
Wow.
Yes, but
Okay.
you're right that they do. They can look at their ancestry a little bit better than
Better
we.
than we can, because
Yes,
ours was just
yeah.
totally buried into.
Wow.
Okay, we started at slavery. That's
Okay.
what we started
Yes,
from.
ma'am.
Okay. So
Okay.
next slide, please. So, so I want to talk a little bit more about historical trauma. And one of the things that I always leave this slide in here, because it's also saying that white counselors should understand historical trauma when it comes to treating African Americans or Black people. They need to understand that you're not just seeing this person where they are, you are also being, they're presenting what has happened to their experiences of their ancestors when they come into the counseling, session. So they need to be aware of how historical trauma does affect us. Okay. And they should also integrate this into their practice. And you'll be very surprised that a lot of white counselors do not do this. And this is why I keep this slide in here, because when I speak to white counselors or soon to be white counselors, they don't know. They'll get bits and pieces of it when they're in school, but they don't really go into what we're talking about today, which makes it hard for them to understand where a Black person is coming from when they come into the session. And then the other thing is that post-traumatic stress disorder, needs to be deepened as far as when we look it up now, as far as when we look at post-traumatic stress disorder, it says that it's just one single incident that makes you be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that for Black folks, it's an everyday thing.
Come on now. Come on.
It's like when you wake up in the morning, you go outside, you don't know what you're going to experience, whether it's microaggressions, maybe it's racism. But what that does, it leads to hypervigilance, where we're always looking to see what's going to happen next.
Wow.
And we internalize racism, and we're very sensitive to racial threats. Now, you imagine people who are not going to counseling, what they're dealing with internally.
But don't even have a clue what they're going through, period, because they reacting to something that no one ever explained to them that
Right.
just was taking place.
Right. And that's why I gave the example also of the police in Black communities, and how that this discriminatory practices of law enforcement. And we know of people who have died, and I don't want to get into that because it's a lot. But we know that is a part of our historical trauma that started during slavery and continued after slavery when it comes to law enforcement as well.
Wow, this is good.
Okay.
Yes, it
Next
is.
one.
Hi, Mama Deborah. How are you? Thanks for joining in on Assignment Network. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. I love Inspire Podcast. Your vibes are just great. And I just wanted to say that this is so important. It's been buried too long. And, we have to this is very spiritual, because of the fact that when Black people, I'll say Black people, when we start talking about our history, then it seems as if we are being radical, or we're not being a part of society. All what's been going on from the beginning of time is all this called racism, the way they have treated and separated the Blacks from African Americans, from our African sisters and brothers, making us seem like that one is better than the other. This is all seem like it's just genocide. But I'm just so grateful that Inspire Podcast, Pastor Dr. Gloria Blair, and you all took up this project to give back to us to help feed us and show us what's going on. Now, I pray and hope that no one tries to stop this, because every time we get a head up, someone wants to put their foot down on us. We have got to know who we are. My dad used to tell me often, if we don't know where we've been, how do we know where we're going? And he would always say, as she just said, the doctor said a few minutes ago, we are resilient people. We have had to fight. And the women, my God, women have had to hold up everything. And we want our men, and we pray that our men get back to their place in life, in God, and do what they're supposed to do. And we need a break.
Amen.
I say
Amen.
this,
Come
we
on,
need
Mama.
a break. But this program is so vital to the community. And I pray that as it's being recorded today, that it would show over and over again often.
Amen.
So that others may learn and have some healing about who they are. Our women are suffering. Our young girls are suffering. Our children are killing themselves. I'm crying for my people, because we need this. We need help. And I just want to thank you, Inspire Podcast, and your guests for coming in and being brave enough, because you got to be brave to do this, because you are being hated, and they're not even looking at the body of what you're talking about. They just looking at the outside. It's all hate, racism, everything is just all hate. But
Amen.
I'm just glad that you all are talking about it. I just love this program, and I'll continue to learn and listen. Even God knows I'll be 70 this year, and if God's will, say the same. And I just pray that other women don't have to get as I've been knowing this for all my life. I've been knowing it all my life, but I did not say except to the ones that were closest to me. But now it's on a national level. So thank you.
To God be the glory.
Podcast.
Thank you.
To God be the glory.
Yes, ma'am. So this slide you have up now, what is this?
Okay, so this is Dr. Patricia Hill Collins. And as I said before, I always have research, and I back everything up with evidence. And so what I'm going to talk about is the sexual politics that has happened with Black folks throughout the generations and up to now. And one of the things is that they have used starting during slavery as a state-sanctioned sexual assault as a form of social control over Black women. And so it was institutionalized as far as rape of Black women. If a white man raped a Black woman, nothing was done about it during slavery and stuff. And so they exploited Black women's bodies also for entertainment. On the next slide, it will talk about Sarah Bartman. Yes. As a result.
Display her, took a cross, not just in this country, but in other countries, in British, in different overseas things, and how. Go ahead. Yes, come on.
So this particular author talks about, he emphasizes how popular culture and mass media still uses the same type of stereotypes about Black women. You know, we have the angry Black woman, you know, and there was the welfare queens. All of this is to say that there is something wrong with Black women.
Well, can I say that everything you just said on this about Black women, the ism of the social and ideology of this, all laws in our country, majority of them, I can't say all, majority of the laws that they have right now to like procreation and healthcare and everything came off that Black woman.
Yes.
Because there was a in Kentucky, they still using her body parts today. Her family is trying to stop them because of the history and the technology and the discoveries of different medical procedures was done on her body because they never had anything like that before. So you're right. All of this that you got up there.
Yes. And so there's a book that just came to my memory. It's called Medical Apartheid. If you get a chance to read that, it talks about how Black people were experimenting with, starting with during slavery and to this present day. There are, so it goes a long way.
A long way.
Yeah.
You mean to tell me that these injections ain't new?
No.
Even Black women, when they were trying to understand, and when I say they, I'm talking about white doctors, were trying to understand how to do cesarean section, C-sections and things like that, would use no anesthesia on Black women when they were doing that.
The pain,
and that goes back to the myth, what I'm talking about, the myth of the strong Black woman. And we can take anything.
And it still goes on today with our doctors today.
Absolutely.
They believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next slide, please.
I know they gotta keep me in check.
So this is what I was alluding to with Sarah Barton. She died at age 26, but her body was used as like a freak show attraction because she had the heavy behind, and they thought that her body parts were kind of exaggerated, and so it wasn't until 1976 that they stopped displaying her body. And so this is the foundation of our scientific racism, sexism, and colonialism when it comes to Black women. So you think about this lady's body was exploited, at this time. That was in 1789, in the 19th century.
Yeah, from 1789 to 1976.
Yeah.
Wow.
So in the 19th century in Europe, this was, she was displayed. Okay, next one.
Wow. So this is, okay, I'm seeing the progression of where our kids and women are going with why they got to go get injections and exploiting their bodies the way that they're doing now. I'm seeing it come together.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. So when I start talking about the strong Black woman, this cultural construct was embraced by Black women, because we say, oh, I'm a strong Black woman, but it's also outside of the Black community as well. What I want to emphasize here is Black women are viewed as hard workers by others. And they're asked to do emotional work. How many of you have been on jobs and then, somebody's coming up to you telling their whole history and things that have gone through instead of going to a counselor? Because we're supposed to be able to handle all of that. Okay. And so these images of Black women during slavery, such as being a hard worker, being loyal, they call them mammy, started during slavery, all of these images. And the other thing is that we have taken on this as a cultural signifier, that this is who we are. We overcome hardships and adversities. And that also that we have a cultural commitment to our community. So it could be anybody in the community. And the problem, I will talk about later, yes, there are some commitments that we need to have, but then we neglect ourselves when we do this. So there has to be a balance with this. Okay.
So is that what happens when, in the slavery days where we always had to take care of their kids and ours too?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yes. We had to hear her cry about her husband, the white woman, as we clean the house. We were getting our degrees then in listening and trying to encourage.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is where it started.
Wow.
Okay. Next one. So go to the next slide. We're going to talk about some images that come up.
Oh, why did you do this to me? You shouldn't have done this to me.
So there's the mammy image there. There is the
vixen.
The Jezebel.
Which one is Jezebel? The one with the long, which one?
Look at the one with Scandal. She
Oh.
sleeps with everybody, and there's one with the lady holding her breast. These are all the images to this day
Yes, ma'am.
that are used in social media. It's used in media. It's used in newspaper, whatever. These are the images, the contemporary images that started during slavery.
Can please, I promise not to take too much time.
That's okay. That's okay.
Now, the images from slavery, when they came over and they was being sold and putting on the auction block, they would strip them down naked and everything. And the embarrassment of back then, that was embarrassing for the Black woman, because they were searching them, going in the mouth and all of that, spread your cheeks and everything. Now, fast forward today, to be up on the auction block today, the stripper pose and showing your body and doing it, and not to say they not embarrassed, but they seem like they fed into the image, but also psychologically had to make themselves think this is the only way I can get the attention or to feel good about myself. This past weekend with the Essence convention, they had an uproar about the women getting up on stage and showing their behinds and things like that. To me, it reminded me of what you're saying now, the image of how we are not only viewed ourselves, but how other people view us. And we feed into it even more so. We are the most visible group of women, the people on planet Earth. Black women are imitated, give it, they looked on, copy, can't make a perfect copy. Anywho,
you better say that, yeah.
But we are
and that goes back to what I was saying before, that we have internalized racism.
This stuff.
We have internalized racism, but we're talking about where this trauma started. It started during slavery. And we have just passed it on and stuff. Okay, next slide. Here's some more images. There's Precious, that movie where Monique was playing this hard woman, and was very mean, was abusive to her child. Yeah, so these are the images that are still with us today that we have fed into as well.
Wow.
Okay, next. So where did it start? Well, we kind of talked about already and stuff, but it started during slavery. These controlling images of Mammy, the breeder woman, welfare queen or mother, Jezebel, the angry Black woman. These were socially constructed, and they were controlling images of Black womanhood. So this is our womanhood. But the cult of true womanhood, which was the white women, their images were being pure, pious, submissive, and domesticity. So you can see that there was very stark difference between the two. But I would argue that white women, they had things going on too that was, because they had to also submit to these images as well and stuff. But you can see ours is mostly to denigrate and to put down and to control.
And to control. And it was more so to control because of, as they said back then on slavery, if you can control the Black woman, you can control the Black man.
Absolutely. Okay, next slide.
The front door.
And the back.
Okay, so I wanted to show this image. This is something, I have a lot of pictures of when I went to Ghana. And this is what they call the slave castle. And the slave castle is where they housed Africans who were enslaved before they were shipped off to around the African diaspora, not just to the United States, but we know in other countries as well. So at the bottom, because it's like almost 3 levels, at the bottom is where they house Africans, and they would sort them out. Okay, so they had a place for children, they had a place for women, and then they had a place for people who have resisted. When I went into one of these castles, I mean these dungeons, I just want to call them dungeons.
Yeah,
at the very, very top was this small place for you to breathe out of, and they couldn't even, get up there because it was at the top. The thing is that when I walked in there, it was so dark, and they were housing at least 150 to 200 at a time in these, and they would have to stay in there for 3 to maybe 5 months, depending on when the ship came to get them. The people who have resisted, they got no food. They had the skeleton, the crossbone skeleton on top of their door. There was no room to breathe. So in other words, they smothered them. They died of suffocation because they were being resistant. And so the thing is that they'll tell you, like when I was in school, they just said that Black people just fell in line with that and that they weren't resisting. I found out when I did my own research that we have always resisted slavery, but they tried to put in storybooks and in history books that we are just docile people and that we just fell in line with it. But that's not true. That is not true. But that's what they say. I want to call attention to all the way up to the top. There is, some windows, and at the top was the governor's mansion, or whatever you want to call it. He could look down upon the courtyard and pick out Black women that he wanted to sleep with. There was a secret entryway to his quarters, and so he would actually they clean them up, of course, and then he would get them and he would rape them. There in the middle, you will see there is a like an entryway, and that's where the church was. So the church was right in the middle. You can kind of see there's an archway, and that is where people went in to have church. Now, legend says that as they were having church, they could hear the slaves moaning and crying and things of this nature. And they would ask the soldiers, can you shut them up? Because we're trying to have church.
Now that's a conflict completely.
Okay.
You got
Okay, so who was telling them? The master now?
The people who were attending church was telling them that they need to go down and
they moaning and groaning and crying and carrying on, please help and all and everything. And they going out to tell them to please tell them to close their mouth and stop that noise. Wow. In church.
I'm gonna ask this question again. Was it the Black people or the white people that was telling them that?
It was the white people. The Portuguese were the first two.
Okay, the Portuguese. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And there were from England, of course, the British.
British.
And then the Dutch as well. This particular slave castle, there's many in Ghana. There's about 35 that still exist. But this particular one is the oldest one, and the first was started by the Portuguese, or the ones that started enslaving before anyone else. There was a priest that said that we should use Africans because they're very spiritual and they're very strong.
Well, they also, when they came to this country, they used because the Native Americans was the first ones they was using here. Right. And they was able to escape and blend in. That's when they brought Black people, said, well, we know we can use them because we can pick them out if they go and try to escape. They can't blend in. There's no way to hide. So let's use them.
Yeah. And then also it was because Native Americans came and encountered white folks, and they were dying. because of the diseases that were introduced to
Just to
Native
get right
Americans.
to smallpox
And
all of
all that
that.
stuff. And that's one of the reasons
Wow.
why they decided to, well, before that, it was indentured servitude. And then those were white people coming over. And
Yeah.
then there was the Native Americans. Then it was Africans, because as the Portuguese or the priest from Portugal has said, and I forgot his name, I'm sorry, but he was the one that started that. And what's very interesting is that when I went to Portugal, they do not talk about slavery, and they're the ones that originated slavery.
And Queen Elizabeth gave the go ahead, and John Holy Hawkins was the one who had the crest of the British government, and they gave the okay for let us do the slavery thing, and that's where. When you just said that they go into the church and then worshiping, and then they in there, that was a conflict for real.
Yes. Well, anytime that people would conquer others, they did it in the name of God. And that's a whole nother history lesson.
I was going to say, that's a whole nother history.
I don't even want to go there.
I'm trying to tell you, this is going to be one of them.
All of this stuff was because, of course, Africans were heathens, and stuff. And so they want to introduce Christianity and stuff, because Africans walked around a lot of times with when they encountered them in Africa, especially West Africa, is that they had no clothes on. Well, they didn't wear the clothes that were worn in the 18th, 19th century, like white folks. It was hot, okay? So we may not have a whole bunch of clothes on, but they saw that, especially with women, as because they're heathens, that they're hypersexual and things of this nature. So
wow.
So that's another myth. That's where all of this is coming.
This is coming from
yes,
that mindset and the thinking of it, and how God's religion was used to do this, and in the name of God, like you said, in the name of God, and the trauma that comes with it. And then we look now and wonder why we feel how we feel when it comes to church.
Right.
Like you said, if we look at the history and the things that has been, superimposed upon, this is where it's coming from. And like you said, if we don't know what happened back then, where we come from, we will never understand the mindset of why we do what we do right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, we appreciate you. I'm telling you, because this is some good stuff we're eating. I'm telling you.
Did we like on your mom,
Mama Deborah
said in the beginning, we have not only was we told not to talk about it, but even as I'm sitting here feeling and listening to what you're saying, and that coming up in the stomach, it's like, we're not gonna get over. That happened way back then. No, it's still going on up in here, and we don't understand why, and we don't have a clue on where these feelings are coming from. And then we wonder where that anger in our kids today is coming from, because it's pushed down and stepped on and everything, and now it's starting to bubble up. Even as you're speaking, it's starting to bubble up, and that's that trauma. That's where that generation trauma coming from, because it's like, I'm sitting here and I'm going, I got to go back out here and deal with white people today. And you look and say, like you said, we deal with this on a daily basis and don't even realize where it's coming from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you for your comments. I really do appreciate them. So this is the door of no return. And I wanted to put this in here because if we really look at it, this is where our trauma started. These are the doors that everybody went through to get on the slave ship. And so it's called the door of no return, because we did not return. We did not return. And so I'd like to say, because one of the things, the reason why I started going to different places throughout the African diaspora is because I am interested in understanding where our trauma started. And so the first time, Ghana was my first trip out of the country, and I wanted to go to West Africa because there's so many slave castles, in not only in Ghana but in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and other places. But they all have some kind of version of the door of no return.
Mm.
So this is where our trauma started. Is we left everything, stripped of everything, and then was told, we can't read or write. That happened during slavery. Stripped of all of our
language,
language, the way we do things, but
our names, all of that. We were stripped.
Absolutely. But the issue is that even though we were stripped of that, there were some ways that we did resist. I don't know if y'all have heard of women who would put not corn, but rice in their hair, and they went over to the United States and planted rice and things of that nature. A lot of the food that we eat comes from our people. The buildings, a lot of the buildings, even like when we talk about the White House, we are everywhere. The markings and the trappings of what we have done is everywhere. But the problem is, the reason why we continue to have generational trauma, because it's not really acknowledged. It is not acknowledged. It needs to be a reckoning of that. And if they're not going to do it, we're going to have to heal ourselves. We have to be, as Pastor V, I call her Pastor V, says all the time, the Calvary is not coming. So we're going to have to be the Calvary.
Yeah.
We're going to have to heal ourselves. We're going to have to, and this is the reason why I do what I do, is because I'm only one person, but I am trying my best to get the word out that we don't have to live with this trauma, but we first need to acknowledge and understand where it comes from. Because as you were saying, as far as feeling these emotions and things of this nature, we don't know where that's coming from or why, but we know it's something there. But if we don't do anything about it, we just transport it to the next generation.
Wow.
We just did.
So
and that's where we at today, our children.
that is so true.
That's where we at with our children.
That is
Yes.
so true.
Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the different tropes of Black women, especially during slavery. And we went over it a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about that. Okay, so the next slide. So the Jezebel image, we talked a lot about that, where this woman stereotyped, especially starting during slavery. It was a means of trying to, not trying, but sexual terrorism and also victimization of Black women. It derived from sexual exploitation. It was a justification of raping Black women. And so they use stereotypes as being seductive and manipulative, and that we are hypersexual, we're unrapeable. We're animalistic, unable to control our sexual desires and drives, promiscuous, loose, immoral, all of these things. And it was used as in a modern day Jezebel. It would be something that's found in hip hop culture and music videos. So this stereotype is still around.
Okay, so this is what. Okay, that's an image of a Jezebel is more sexual.
Yes.
than what people think controlling.
Yes.
Wow.
That's
because
that
when
way
you hear
of
that,
controlling.
that is a way of controlling.
Yes, because
Using our bodies.
They say they came up with what she just said, that we are like when she said they was in the jungles and they seen them half naked and all of that. Well, That's where that Jezebel image came on. They seductive. They walking around with their
Oh,
breasts
so they
hanging.
just assumed, as you said, okay, I'm slow, but I'm
No,
here.
no, that's okay. I mean, those are the questions that we need to answer so we make sure that we're on the same page. I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
that's really, really important for us to understand. All of these were justifications of being exploiting Black women sexually because we needed Black women to produce children and reproduce children so that we can keep slavery going.
And they justified, said, well, her looks made me have sex with her. Because as they was raping the women and these little mulatto kids start popping up, they had to
Yeah.
justify why did the master rape them?
Or,
That was what I just asked her. I say, so what they do with the mixed babies if they done call them up to the
they
church?
go enslaved. They're enslaved too. They're
Really?
enslaved too. And so that's one of the things. Like when we start talking about white women, they had to be around these kids that were
They
probably
husbands.
my husbands and stuff, and they were very mean to them. They would beat them. And
So that goes into the Sarah Hagar type stuff.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and so I'm saying all of this to understand where this image came from. It was a justification, and then it was institutionalized, and laws were made so that that can continue.
Continue.
And now, when we talk about Black women now today, there's over 70,000 Black women missing. That is nothing being done about it because they're Black women.
And they not talking about it, and then being,
Police don't care.
and when they being raped, and Black women do have the courage to go report it. Oh, you wasn't raped. How was you dressed? What did you say?
Oh,
Was
my
you?
God.
What
And
was you?
it's not only law enforcement; it is in our own Black community that are
Right.
questioned.
Oh my God.
And so that goes really
But
deep.
they, like you said, they don't understand where it's coming from, and so we have it was superimposed upon us to think these ways, and that's how we are here today because of what the laws, the judicial system is built on this.
Absolutely.
I want to
Absolutely.
that because I had a friend recently was calling telling me about a young lady that she knew had woke up in the hospital, and she didn't know how she got there. She was dirty. She was all these things. And the first thing the friend said was, did y'all do a rape test on her? Now, why should we have to do that?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's today's.
And that's today. You know what I'm saying? So just to hear and get this information, just to come into the knowledge, because knowledge is power, to be able to, man, come together, as Black women and I thank you, Dr. Joni, so much for this. Do you know what part you stopped on? Because we're about to round down the time. And if you would mind.
So we just got to the Jezebel. I mean, there's others, but this is a good place to stop. One of the things I want to say about Black women is that a lot of times we feel like we have to keep the community together, Black community together. So a lot of times we don't say or we don't report what happens when there's sexual assault or if there's incest in the family, because that's a thing where we don't want to get that Black man in trouble or a Black woman in trouble. Keep it in the family.
Don't say nothing what goes on in the house.
And this is what I'm seeing to this day with my women that I see in my counseling. A lot of times they're in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and this is the first time they're actually really talking about what happened to them sexually, or they're sexually exploited, or an uncle raped them, or a brother raped them, and they're their first time talking about it, but they have been dealing with all the results of not saying anything. And a lot of them are afraid to say anything because they don't think they're going to be believed. Or I've had some women who said, I told my mother, but she didn't believe me. So we
Wow.
have to, and that's the one thing I think I need to emphasize the most is that we cannot live in silence. We just cannot anymore,
Especially now.
because it affects us not only mentally, it affects us spiritually, but it also affects us how we day to day living, and how we operate, how we have our lives, and how we don't trust people because of something that's happened to them years ago. All of those things affect us now, and so it is so important that we openly talk about what we're talking about today, because if we don't talk about it, it's going to affect us also physically. And that's a whole nother segue. We can talk about how it affects us, even autoimmune deficiencies and things of that. It's because we're carrying so much stuff that we don't talk about, heart disease, diabetes, all of
high
high
blood
blood
pressure.
pressure. All
Yeah.
of these are because we are not really addressing the things that are going on in our lives. Because you can't separate the heart and the body and the soul. All of that is together.
Combined.
Yes, and even cancer. I mean, it goes on,
Okay.
and so what I'm talking about, I always back it up with evidence, research, because I don't want anybody to ever say I don't know what I'm talking about, because they're quick to tell a Black woman that. But that is why I'm so insisting on saying things and then saying, okay, this is where I got this from. So I've done 9 years of research with this.
I thank you so very much for just speaking upon this, because like you said, it's very important that we as Black women do talk about it.
So this is only part one of,
Yeah.
okay, Sisters Addressing Trauma of the Strong Black Woman. We will post up when the next part two will be up. Miss Joni and I will put it out there for you guys on our Facebook and Instagram page. I just again want to thank you, Miss Joni, for your time and your efforts
Thank you.
so much. Thank you for just the buffet you put before us. Amen.
And we just started eating just the appetizer.
Yes, that was just
Yeah.
an appetizer. Amen. Amen. And thank you again, Dr. Joni Wilson, for joining us and giving us information on the myth of the strong Black woman. We will be back. I'm not gonna give a date yet, but when I get with Miss Joni and I to go to part two of a myth of a strong Black woman, I want to thank you, Inspire Podcast family, and we'll see y'all in another 2 weeks. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.